Hey, my name's TC Burr. Welcome to Yet, a podcast created to encourage you to get your goal or idea out of your head and into reality. On this podcast, you'll hear stories, encouragements, tips, and ideas to help you write your book, start your business, launch your podcast, or whatever it is you hope to accomplish. Because it's not that you haven't done it, it's just that you haven't done it yet. My guest today is Elle Richmond. Elle, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I typically start these off with allowing my guests to introduce themselves. I always think it's interesting to hear from the person on the other side of the microphone to just talk a little bit about kind of what it is that they do and what they're working on. So if you could, in 30 seconds or less, tell folks kind of who you are and what you do.
I'm Elle Richmond. I'm a Texas native. I'm a wife and a mother, and those two titles are arguably the most important. By trade, I'm a DOT logistics terminal manager. It's a really fancy way of saying I tell people where to go and what to do. And I'm in the process of writing my first novel. And at 37 years old, been married for 15 years. I have an 11-year-old and a 2-year-old and a full-time 6-figure all-go no-quit job. So if I can do it, anyone can do it.
So you got a lot of stuff going on, it sounds like. So is the novel, tell me a little bit about like how you got to that. Like, is this something you've always wanted to do that's kind of been nagging at the back of your mind forever? Or is this relatively new development in your life? Talk about that.
I think that I've always been told that it was something I should do. I wrote when I was much, much younger. I always had teachers, hey, you should be a writer, or you should be a journalist. You know, parents were just pleased as punch. And it was always this very grandiose idea. And I almost immediately and always dismissed it as impractical. And I didn't really pick it up with any serious intent until I kind of got called to the carpet on it by my husband in 2015. And then we had some familial setbacks, death in the family and some major surgeries and things that delayed it for a few years. And then COVID happened. And from COVID to where I am now, I truly decided, hey, you get one life. This is something you want to do. Let's do it. So it's years in the process, but only recently did I actually decide to attempt.
Okay. And so is that around the time, like 2020, 21, is that around the time you started, or was it COVID was kind of the catalyst and you didn't start until more recently?
So I technically started in 2015.
Okay.
And it wasn't even on the book that I'm writing now. I was working a job that I absolutely hated with every fiber of my being. And it was in sales, in case you're wondering. I'm a logistics girl. It needs to be math, not sales, for me to find my niche. And couldn't stand what I was doing, was complaining to my husband, and yet hadn't really embraced the idea that you have to create the work culture that you want to be in. So I was complaining for the sake of complaining. And I was sitting at my desk and I kind of wrote this little blurb that I had been toying with, and I sent it to my husband, and he was like, that's great. You know, you have this job, you have all this downtime, you don't like what you're doing, pursue this. And I was like, okay, great. Yeah. Like encouragement. And I think I toyed around with it for 6 weeks, and I would send him a paragraph here, or a couple of words here, and I'd get my little pat on the head and I'd go on about my day. And after about 6 weeks, he told me, okay, I'm done. This is not working for me anymore. He said, you send me a paragraph, you send me a couple sentences, and I get excited, you even send me a page or two, and I don't get to go anywhere with it. He said, I didn't tell you to send me short stories. I didn't tell you to send me 100 words. I told you to write a book. He said, I will not read another word you write ever until you hand me a completed book. I'm disinterested. I didn't buy tickets to this ride. I want off. And I really had to sit in that and take accountability for it. And we joke all the time that if I have a love language, it's accountability. And that one threw me for a loop. I mean, when you get called to the carpet, and you need to sit with that. So
yeah. So a little bit of tough love. And so was that the kind of jump start where you said, okay, now it's time to get serious. Now it's time to really kick it into high gear?
I decided to take it seriously, and I plotted out that whole book. In fact, that is a science fiction trilogy that is incredibly grandiose. And I plotted out all 3 books, and I started writing pretty seriously and didn't bother him about it. Almost somewhat in a juvenile sense, like I'm going to pout.
That's
And
right.
really got into it, even took it seriously enough to start downloading software so that I had it on my phone and on my computer. And did that for about 3 months and got about a third of the way through the first book, not understanding anything about marketing or what can sell or any of that. And right after that, my big brother died. And then 3 months after my brother died, my husband had to have emergency spine surgery. And then on the day of his spine surgery, we found out that I was having a miscarriage.
Oh, wow.
So 2016 was not a very kind year to our family.
Yeah.
And I didn't touch it for a couple years, at least. And then in 2018, I took a new job, finally. Found a really good group and a really good place. And that's actually where I met Drew. And Drew is one of those incredibly unique individuals that she kind of cultivates excellence in the people that she picks up and brings around her. And normally I find my friends and I put them in my back pocket and go on about my life. I'm the bigger personality. And in this instance, it was completely the opposite. Drew kind of picked me up and said, "Oh, okay, we're friends now. And let's share everything." And she was sharing some stuff that she had written. And I kind of piped up and said, "Oh, well, I write too." And we started bouncing off of one another and both moved on to bigger positions in that wake of 2 years during COVID. Kept climbing the ladder. And she called me about 8 months ago and said, "Hey, I'm taking a publishing class. Do you want to take it?" Cool. Yeah, that sounds like a blast. We took the publishing class, and kind of halfway through it, I looked at her because they had mentioned a writers convention. I think she told you about it in Dallas of every year. They had mentioned a writers convention and said, "Hey, this is a great place to network." And it tells you everything about it. And if your submissions are accepted, you'll even get the chance to pitch, but you have to have a completed manuscript. I kind of piped up and said, "Okay, we have a hardline deadline." And she was like, "Okay," instead of telling me that I was crazy. And we have professional jobs and small children. And no, we're not doing this. That's insanity. She jumped in the boat. She said, "Okay, let's do this." And now we're neck deep in it. I think we're both about 35% of the way completed. And my husband's thrilled, by the way. He reads every word now. That he now believes I'm going to finish. So he's on board with reading a chapter a week.
That's awesome. Yeah. So it sounds like encouragement and accountability have played a critical role in your process, like having the support and encouragement, and sometimes tough love, and sometimes just that partnership of knowing you're in it with someone, or that someone's cheering for you, cheering you on is pretty important for the work that you're doing. So, and I love your story. And Drew shared this when I interviewed her about how you guys have kind of locked arms and said, "All right, we're doing this together." Like you took the class together, you're going to the conference together, and you're writing. And you guys you're not only just kind of keeping tabs on each other through text messages, right? Like you meet up regularly and have like workshop days. Like talk a little bit about kind of what some of that looks like for you.
So we worked together, and I won't always say that we were the best of employees because I would drift down to her office or she would drift down to mine. And we would start kicking ideas off of one another. And then when we took the publishing class, that was when I really decided that, hey, you start to understand that this is no longer just a passion project. If you're trying to do it, there's a whole other side of it. It is a job. It's a job. There's work to be done. And a lot of times we romanticize this idea of, I'm going to be an author, I'm going to be published. And you forget that there's a lot of steps between here and there.
Yeah.
And Drew, when we agreed to start doing this, she's a genius at that. So we figured out really what works and what doesn't. I completely set aside the project that I was working on and picked up another one that I had started kind of intermittently. And now we meet once every 6 weeks, once every 8 weeks. We do full workshop days. We talk on the phone about every other week for about an hour at a time. And then as we complete either sections or chapters, because our process and our writing styles are vastly different, we kick those back and forth to one another. And then at the same time, it's kind of come full circle. The second I send Drew something, I turn around and I send the same thing to my husband. And where Drew reads it and she kind of absorbs it because I'm kicking the entire story back and forth with her, I'm also getting his perspective as a first-time reader and a first-time male reader, which I think is also important that you have both sides of that. So he picks up on things from a male character's perspective that not necessarily I would have thought of. And then she picks up on it from someone who's looking at the entire arc. And having those two resources, it's been invaluable.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned somewhere in there, you mentioned the process and how your process is a little bit different than hers, or I think you said vastly different actually. Uh, Talk a little bit about kind of what your process is. Are there any specific like tools or systems or methods that are unique to you, or like tried and true? This is the way I'm going to do it. Talk a little bit about, because I what I've learned as writing myself and talking with other writers is not everybody does it the same. There's a lot of different tools, a lot of different paths out there. So I'm curious to hear a little bit specifically about kind of what that looks like for you.
So for me, I almost never have only one project going at a time. I think a big part of it is worth mentioning that you need to find a writing software that you enjoy using. And particularly for me, it's important to have one that syncs from my phone to my laptop, because I don't always have my laptop with me, and I'll get bits and pieces of dialogue when I'm driving that I have to record right then and there. Otherwise they're gone. They're gone into the ether. And I'll sit with those and I'll start to put together sentences, and then I'll start to put together backstory. And then I write probably 10 to 20 scenes. And then I'll actually sit down and decide if this story is worth pursuing. And then without fail, I plot from beginning, middle to end. I need to know what happens in every chapter. I need to know what the pivotal points are. And then I look at the story from start to finish. Where are my holes? Where do I plug this? How do I get from point A to point B? Because I have brilliant dialogue. Dialogue is the easiest thing in the world. It's funny, it's snarky, it's warm. I know where the trauma is coming from, but I have to fix the holes before they ever appear. So for me, having it at point A all the way to Z is absolutely crucial. And then it's just gutting it out. It's gut work. It's figuring out 20 different ways to say he walked across a room.
Yeah. So you mentioned the software, having that sync between your devices. I'm curious, what do you use for your writing software?
So I use Scrivener. It was at the time I downloaded it was one of the best on the market. I know that there's probably some competing software. I'm not sponsored in any way, but Scrivener for me, it's the first thing I picked up, and it's just what I've stuck with since then.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I've no experience with that, but I've heard others recommend it. So, what is it about that particular software that you like? Just this? Is it just the kind of access across devices, or is there more to it that makes it good for you?
So the access across devices was pretty crucial, and it was at the time it was one of the only ones that really offered that had a fully fledged app that could integrate on an iPhone or an Android platform, and it was also one of the only ones to where if you had an iPhone but you didn't have a MacBook, like I'm a Windows laptop, but I have an iPhone.
Got it.
It was one of the only ones that had synchronicity across both. And so that was completely crucial. You do have to download an intermediary. Like I use Dropbox to sync between the two. But overall, that experience has been the most seamless for me. I've seen some other people using Notes, and I want to say Pages, and there's a couple other ones, but that one was a game changer for sure. And it's when I first started taking it seriously, because there's no, I'm a runner, so I'll be on a run 3 miles deep in the backwoods in some swamp somewhere, and I'll have a brilliant line. And then by the time I get back to my car, sweaty and exhausted, it's gone. Well, I have a phone now that in the middle of nowhere, it will record this thought, and it's there. It's waiting for me when I get back, so I don't lose anything. And there's also no excuse. You're stuck at the DMV. Why aren't you writing? You have time.
That's right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So when you're having these ideas come to you, you mentioned that you're on a run, you're in the car, and you've got this like piece of dialogue or this piece of the story that is there, and if you don't grab it, it's gonna be gone. Are you doing that like with a voice note, or are you like pulling over on the side of the road and actually typing it in your phone to the software that syncs up?
So if it's dialogue, what I will do is I'll open the app, and then thankfully now it has a talk to text feature. It didn't used to have that. I used to have to open my text messages, hit the microphone and record it, or go to voice recordings and talk into the voice recordings. And then I had to go through the agony of hearing my own voice talking back when I would play it back, handwrite it out, and then transcribe it. Thankfully now it's a lot more seamless. You actually have voice to text within the Scrivener app. So it just records it once, and then I can read it later and fix the holes. So if it's dialogue, I'll do that while I'm actually in the process. If it's a huge plot point, like if I've figured something out or decided that I need to add this, I will stop what I'm doing. And my son has actually been late to school because no, kid, we have to stop right here. Mom needs 2 minutes. We're just going to sit at this convenience store. I'll sign you in when we get there.
Hey, listeners. So I'm doing it. I'm writing my book. It is a lot of fun. It's way harder than I thought it would be. It is sometimes really painfully slow, but I'm doing it. I'm taking a story that has existed for a long time in my head and I'm putting it on pages. And I am so excited to continue this process, to continue editing. And I'm just really, really excited to bring this story to you eventually. I don't know when that's going to happen, but I am so looking forward to that day when I can share it out with more people and hold a copy of the book, the bound, finished book that I have written. Hey, listen, if you are a writer or know any writers, I want to hear those stories. So would you please, if you know a writer or you are a writer, connect with me. I want to hear your story. I want to hear about what you're writing, why you're writing, how you got into writing, and what your process has looked like so far. Whether you're just at the beginning stages or you've already published one or more books, I want to hear your story. So send me an email. It's connect@tcburr.com. You can also go to my website. It's tcburr.com. You'll find a link there to contact me. Let's get in touch. I want to talk with you. I want to hear your story, and I want to encourage other people with it. Thanks. Back to the show. So what are, as you think about kind of your writing journey from where you started to where you are now, what are some of the biggest maybe lessons that you've learned? And this could be, about the technicalities of writing itself or things that you've learned about yourself as a person or as a writer. I'd love to know, as you just kind of get introspective for a minute, like what are some of the big lessons that you've learned along the way?
How to grow up and take my ego out of it. The idea that there's a recognition that you have to own this. You have to admit the foolish thing. You have to say that, hey, this is what I want. And you can't say, oh, I don't care if I get published, or I don't care if this never is. If you didn't care, you wouldn't do it.
That's right.
So if it was just for the sake of the art, like not only do you want to be a writer, you want to be a successful writer.
Sure.
Because if it was just for the sake of the art, or if it was just because you wanted to write a book, you would just write the book and you put the thing on the internet for free and you would never care. But that's not what you want. So when you have an accountability partner, and I'm thankful enough to have multiple people in my life that look at you and say, hey, I know you're capable of playing a bigger game, step up and own it, because what you want isn't foolish. The lack of effort for the amount of dream, that's what's foolish. So it's not take your ego out of it, admit that you want it, and then stop romanticizing the outcome and start romanticizing the work.
That's good. That's really good. So this podcast I mentioned is for people who have a goal or an idea like writing. It doesn't have to be writing. For some people, it's, I've always wanted to launch this company, or I want to start a podcast or teach a course or whatever, something that they feel like they want to do that's maybe a little different than the traditional path that they've chosen, career-wise or whatever. What is the best advice that you would give to somebody who is just starting out? And specifically, since you're writing, like, let's think about from the standpoint of a writer, like you have an idea, you feel like you want to go for it, but you're just not quite to that point where you have the drive or the motivation or the, like, whatever it is, that spark that like causes somebody to go from a dream to actually marching out and like taking action on it. What's the best advice you would give to that person?
Realize that this is finite. You get one go round. That's it. And stop underestimating the amount of time that you waste. If you're dreaming about it, then if you have time to dream about it, if you have the thought process that I want to own a company, I want to write a book, I want to paint a masterpiece, I want to go back to medical school, I don't care what it is, but if you have time to conceptualize it to the point to where it's a constant thought, it's a repeat player in your mind, you have time to start doing the work on it. I read something the other day that was somewhat flippant. Like, it was something about the process of writing a book, and you have to go through the plains of procrastination and the pit of despair. And it was meant to be funny.
Yeah.
And the last line, though, it really grabbed me and it stuck with me. And the last line of this supposed joke was, every day you have to wake up and throw yourself on the sword of nobody made you do this. And you have to, at your job, you have a boss, you have someone that's making you work towards this goal, but you're not working for yourself in your free time. You're just daydreaming about it. You've got the time, but on the flip side, you get one life. So how much of it are you going to waste wanting to do things for other people as opposed to truly owning who it is that you want to be and what it is that you want to do?
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good. One of the things that I've been thinking and reading a lot about lately is the idea of time management, because I think most people, at least in the circles that I'm in, I talk to them and they say, oh, I want to do this thing. I would love to write a book. I just don't have the time. And like, we have so much more free time or downtime or open time than we think we do, but we end up wasting it on things that don't matter. And I love your perspective. Like, if this is a dream that you've got, if this is something that this is not just a one-time, spark of an idea. This is something that keeps coming back and like keeps gnawing at you and nagging at you. Like, find the time, like the time is there, and start going. And I always try to encourage people, like, yeah, of course you want your thing to take off and be like, and right. I love what you said about like, hey, when people say like, oh, yeah, if only one person reads it, I'll be happy. Like, no, would you really? Like, probably not. You're probably doing this because you want to impact, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people. Right. But I always want to encourage people, like, that might happen. That will never happen if you don't do it. And it might happen if you do. But even if it doesn't, like, my thing is like, I don't want to live with the regret of like, man, I wish I had done that thing. Like, I feel like I would rather have gone for it, given it my best shot. And maybe it doesn't end up finding the kind of success that I had hoped for, but at least I know I did it, than to be, an old man on my deathbed and wondering like, what would have happened if I actually tried to do that thing. Right.
There's actually really two interesting tools that I would suggest, and you'll probably be very interested in it. I know that it impacted me in it. I hadn't even considered writing a book at the point that I read this. But first of all, if you have an iPhone, you can click on the settings of your iPhone and you can go to your battery and you can check your usage and you can check your apps, and it will tell you exactly how many hours and minutes a day you spend on Pinterest, Instagram, Facebook, right. Whatever it is that you're doing. This is how much time you're killing. So don't tell me you don't have the time.
That's right. Yeah.
An article, and you're welcome to Google it. I'm sure I'm going to butcher the name, but it's essentially titled "The Top 10 Regrets of the Dying." And it was a hospice nurse who interviewed hundreds of people as they were in their final hours. And she would ask them the same questions over and over again. And the theme that came out of that was repetitive. I wish I had spent more time doing what made me happy. I wish I hadn't felt embarrassed about the life that I wanted to live. I wish that I had told the people that mattered to me the ways that they had mattered to me. And you can read this as hundreds of exit interviews, and no one regrets I didn't make more money. No one regrets that they didn't spend more time at work. She's interviewed CEOs and she's interviewed janitors. To have that theme be so repetitive, I wish that I had been more authentic to who I was. I think that's pretty powerful, and it's a pretty good indicator of what's truly valuable as a human, because that spans all races, classes, social hierarchies. You got the top 10 things getting repetitively stated at death. You should probably pay attention to that.
Yeah, for sure. It helps. Something like that really kind of puts it into perspective, right? Like, we spend so much time and energy worried about things that at the end of the day, I mean, they don't matter. So yeah, I think that's great. Okay. So we've talked a little bit, we've kind of touched on this in some aspects, but one of the things that I'm really big on is encouragement. I think that for most people who haven't made much progress on their goal, a lot of them is one of the key ingredients that's often missing is encouragement. Somebody in your corner who's cheering you on, holding you accountable, like helping you when you fall, all that kind of stuff. And it sounds like you have a good network of people that are doing that for you. But I'm curious if there a specific moment or a specific word or a specific action that you could point to and say, like, man, that was, for me, that was the thing that really, like, as I consider my journey, like, that was such a big milestone. Like, is there one or two of those that you would highlight as maybe the most encouraging thing someone's ever said or done for you?
I would reference back to my husband telling me, and I'll give you the PC version, but him calling me to the carpet and saying, absolutely, I will not read another damn word that you write ever until you hand me a completed book. I don't believe you. That was, I wouldn't say it's encouragement, but in reality, there's a difference between encouragement and validation. Encouragement is someone who looks at you and says, hey, I see this spark that you have, and I believe that this could be something great. You are capable of playing a bigger game. Step up. versus, oh my God, you wrote 7 sentences. That's the best thing ever. You should be a writer.
Right.
Like you need to learn the difference between encouragement and validation. And that was learning that lesson from the person whose opinion I valued most and who had the most ability to hurt me when he gave me that opinion.
Sure.
That's, if you're mature enough to sit in that and you really do value the difference between validation and encouragement, you'll learn to seek that out in the right people. And then the flip side of that, honestly, was just Drew looking at me and saying, yeah, let's drive off this cliff together. It is very, very rare that you have someone who is not only willing to encourage you, but willing to join you. There's a marked difference. I have friends that have said, oh my God, you've been skydiving. That's so great. And he'll go, hey, let's go jump out of a plane. I've done it multiple times. I'll take you to do it. You want to do it? Let's go. And then they white knuckle back away. I looked at Drew and, with a little bit of sass and a little bit of pluck, said, hey, looks like we have a deadline. Let's go to DFW. And she was like, okay, let's go to DFW. And I kind of just stopped. It's like, I've asked people to jump out of planes with me before and they wouldn't go. She suited up. And at that point, the second she said, hey, I've got the ticket, she called me the day that the tickets went on sale. And she said, hey, they're live. I'm buying my ticket right now. Do you need me to get your ticket? And then you can just pay me back. Like she's been all in. We're at the edge of a cliff and we're 0 to 60. We're driving the car off it no matter what. So someone to hold you accountable and say that not only are you capable of doing it, but you have to do it if you want my respect, completely pivotal. And then someone saying, hey, you're about to die in a fiery car crash. Looks like fun. Let's go. Those are two of the biggest moments when she saddled up and said, yeah, let's go.
That's awesome. All right. So let's keep it on the theme of moments. So for a lot of people, they have kind of this picture in their mind of a moment in the future where they feel like it's all come together and success has happened. Like, so for some people, this is like, opening a box of their books that, their first book that they wrote. Or for some people, it's, cutting the ribbon of their new business or whatever. And Drew, I think when she shared hers, it was seeing her book on the shelf at the library, which I think was pretty cool. I'm curious for you, do you have any of those moments that you've kind of pictured in your mind of like, oh, I can't wait for this to happen? Like, what are some of those for you?
I don't picture the book in its entirety because the art could change. I don't picture it on a shelf. I don't picture the interviews. I make jokes about having dirty, dirty Hollywood money and going to a premiere where everyone says, oh, the book was better. Of course the book was better.
There you go.
But the
book's always better. Always,
never fails. I think the thing that if I fantasize or if I dream about most, the moment where I think it'll finally be real, and I repeatedly go back to the idea of opening a piece of mail from an agent that I've queried that truly wants to represent the book. And I want to know what that letter looks like. I picture opening the envelope. I picture the envelope being heavier than all the other rejection letters that I've gotten, and opening it up and it's saying something like, Miss Richmond, we're pleased to announce that we would love to have your book represented here at, insert big traditional 5 publisher. I think about that moment quite frequently. And that's
awesome.
I'll worry about the book and the hardcover and the press and the dirty, dirty Hollywood money later. But I want the acceptance letter first.
I think you're going to get it. This is cool. I just based on your drive and your commitment, like you have, as they say, you've burned the ships, like you're doing this, right?
So that is one of my favorite sayings ever. All of my workout hoodies say burn your boats.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, Elle, this has been really fun. I appreciate you taking the time to do it. I have just one final question. How can folks follow along with what you're doing? Do you have a website, social media? How do people connect with you and follow what you're doing?
So on Instagram, which is where I'm the most active, my handle is obviously not Shakespeare. And you can follow me there. My website is also linked. It's just a landing page right now. It's in the very early stages of design. I'm also starting a newsletter to where I can share blurbs as I get closer to publishing. So that one's also straightforward. It's obviously not Shakespeare.com. And then it's the same handle on TikTok. TikTok is a mystery to me. I don't understand it, but I'm learning.
Yeah, I haven't ventured into those waters yet. Maybe one day. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. Really appreciate it. Hope you have a great evening. Thank you.
You too. Bye.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you would do me a huge favor, if you got value out of this podcast, which I'm assuming maybe you did since you're still here, would you scroll down to the bottom of your podcast app and rate and review the show? And maybe share it with someone on social media or with a friend just in a conversation. It would mean so much to get this message out to more people, and I think it would be amazing if you would share it. So that would be, as a personal favor to me, I'd really love it. Also, if you want to know more about me and what I'm working on, you can visit my website. It's tcburr.com. I hope you'll check it out. You can contact me there. Thanks again, and I really appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon.